Good morning and welcome to this hearing in the Sheku Bayoh inquiry. Today the inquiry will take evidence from Mr. Aamer Anwar, solicitor for the families of Sheku Bayoh. In the rest of this hearing, the inquiry will hear evidence relating to certain aspects of training. Good morning, Mr. Anwar. Will you take the oath?
Yes, my lord.
Will you raise your hand, please, and say the words, "I swear by Almighty God."
I swear by Almighty God.
That I will tell the truth.
That I will tell the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Ms. Thompson.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Thompson.
You are Aamer Anwar.
Yes.
How old are you, Mr. Anwar?
56.
You're a solicitor?
Yes.
I believe that you started your traineeship in 2000, which means you would have qualified in 2002?
That's right.
You're the principal solicitor at Aamer Anwar and Co. Solicitors in Glasgow.
That's right.
And you represent the families of Sheku Bayoh.
That's right.
You've done so since the 4th of May of 2015.
Correct.
Can I invite you to open up the blue folder in front of you? There are a number of documents in here that you can refer to at any time during your evidence if you would find that to be helpful. Firstly, there should be within the folder a Rule 8 request issued by the inquiry on the 19th of January of 2024. That has the reference number SVPI 00468. I don't think we need that on the screen, but if you could confirm that we have that in
Yes.
the folder for you, Mr. Anwar. There should also be your response of the 2nd of February 2024. That's SVPI 00453.
Yes.
And again, we don't need that on the screen just now, but may I ask you, in responding to the questions that you were asked in the Rule 8 request, did you do your best to answer those questions truthfully and accurately in your response?
Yes, I did.
The next document we will put up on the screen, please, and that's a statement that you gave to the inquiry. That's SBPI 00549. And if we scroll down a little, we'll see that this is your statement and that it was taken on the 19th and 20th of March of this year. And if we could perhaps go to the very end of the document. We'll see that it was signed by you on the 26th of April of this year. Your signature has been redacted, but hopefully your signature will appear on the copy in front of you.
Yes.
Paragraph 250, reads, "I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website." So you gave your statement knowing that it would form evidence before the chair, that it would be published on the website.
Yes.
And did you do your best to answer the questions that were asked of you truthfully and accurately?
I did.
Mr. Anwar, you've sought the chair's permission to address Sheku Bayoh's families, and that permission has been granted. Would you like to address his families now?
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I'm grateful to your chair for granting that permission. I'm grateful to the chair for giving me the opportunity to say a few words directly to the loved ones of Sheku Bayoh, some of whom are here today and others who find it too painful to come. Sheku should have celebrated his 41st birthday yesterday, but at the age of 31, he left behind 2 young sons, a loving partner, Colette, 3 sisters, Kadi, Adama and Kozna, his mother, Aminata, as well as his brother-in-law, Adi, who loved Sheku as a younger brother. In the midst of their grief, Sheku's family were forced to set up a campaign simply to get to the truth. They never wanted the glare of a media spotlight, but were given no choice because of the failure of the most powerful institutions in our country to do their public duty. Since May 2015, you have met with 2 First Ministers, 3 Lord Advocates, 3 Solicitor Generals, 4 Senior Crown Counsel, 1 Perk Commissioner, 2 Chief Constables, 3 Deputy Chief Constables, and 3 Justice Ministers. Each and every one of those individuals has paid tribute to you for your tenacity, for your courage, for your dignity and your perseverance, whilst asking your family to place their trust in them. But so often that trust was betrayed. In over 9 years, I have seen the devastation wreaked on your family. You have endured years of unimaginable suffering as you fought for justice. I have seen you cry. I have heard your screams of anguish behind closed doors, and I have seen how anxiety, fear, and frustration has followed every milestone in this case. Each member of your family has suffered from severe depression and breakdowns, compounded by your treatment at the hands of the authority. Caddy, who's not here but watching, your family left Kirkcaldy, unwilling for your children to grow up knowing that those connected to their uncle's death are free to patrol the streets. Caddy, you left your job at the hospital as a nurse where your brother was pronounced dead. Addy, you suffered from depression and your business failed. Colette, you suffered from a breakdown and moved away from your home with your baby boy, unable to walk down the street where 500 yards away your beloved Sheik died fighting for his last breath. Sheku's oldest son suffered from a whole number of issues relating to the loss of his father, and Aminata, your only son, is gone, and you say that your soul is shattered. I find it deeply shameful that our so-called civilized system of justice gave you false hope, yet despite this you have refused to be bullied, to be patronized or silenced. And in his death, Sheku was dehumanized, he was smeared, he was stereotyped, in order to strip him of his right to life. But your family's campaign slogan has been, "The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is the duty of the living to do so for them." You have more than fulfilled that duty. And I wanted to pay tribute to your family because without you, there would have been no inquiry. And I hope that your relentless desire to get to the truth ensures that Sheku, a much-loved partner, a son, a brother, an uncle, a friend, is never forgotten. I hope this inquiry will be a lasting testament to your Sheku and a catalyst for permanent change. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we look at paragraph 3 of your statement, please, Mr. Anwar? Here you say a little bit about your career and go on to say that you trained as a criminal defence lawyer but run a multidiscipline practice that specialises in public inquiries, deaths in custody and FAIs. You then say a significant proportion of my practice, around 50%, is pro bono campaign, where families are not entitled to legal aid funding or the family is taking on sections of the state. Now, for the benefit of those listening who are perhaps not lawyers themselves, what is pro bono work?
It's where lawyers will work for families for free and there's no state funding.
Now, when a person dies in state custody or following contact with the police, what entitlement do their family have to state-funded legal advice and representation?
In the first instance, there is no automatic legal aid funding in this country, despite promises made over the years. Secondly, often it is a case that families are told to wait until the fatal accident inquiry, and then some weeks before you will be granted some form of a fatal accident inquiry. But in our experience, often those fatal accident inquiries are some 5 years later, and the concern is from the moment that a person dies in state custody, the family should have legal representation so families can have those fighting in their corner, advocating on their behalf and asking the questions that we did in the case of Sheku Bayoh.
So there's no state funding immediately following a death in police custody or following contact with the police? No funding during the course of a criminal investigation?
No.
During a criminal trial?
No.
You've explained that there may be some funding during a fatal accident inquiry or perhaps also public inquiry.
Only if the family reach the means test. So if their income is slightly too much over the line, they will not be funded. And we've had that in many situations where families have fought for several years, as in the case of Katie Allen, where we had to fight tooth and nail to get that family who fought for 5 years after a suicide in Pullman to get funded.
And that's in the context of a fatal accident
Yes.
inquiry. You were first instructed by Mr. Bayoh's families on the 4th of May of 2015, and you initially represented them on a pro bono basis.
I did so for about 7 years.
This public inquiry was announced in November of 2019, and it was set up on the 30th of November of 2020. You correct me if I'm wrong, but am I right to understand that in December of 2020, a retrospective award was made for the costs of legal work carried out in connection with the inquiry, which was backdated to the date of the announcement of the inquiries? That would be November of 2019.
I would think so, yes.
So you acted pro bono then from May of 2015 until November of 2019. That was perhaps 4.5 years later. Would that be right?
That'd be right. But if I can say, the other work that we do is obviously not funded. So it's only purely funding for the inquiry. So we continued to work with regards to campaigning on behalf of the family and having their voices heard in the public domain.
And for the benefit of those listening, can you explain the difference between work in connection with the inquiry and your campaign work?
Well, the work with regards to the campaign work still continues. The family want justice. It's not simply the case of having the inquiry. The family have always said if it had been somebody else's son, what would they have expected to happen? They would expect to see a criminal trial take place, and that campaign has still continued, whatever the conclusion of this inquiry is.
Are you able to estimate how much of your time you gave pro bono to Mr. Bayoh's families between May of 2015 and November of 2019?
It's difficult to say, but I could probably estimate at least 50 to 60%. It seemed to be from morning to night.
So sorry, is that 50 to 60% of your working day, your working week?
Yes.
In connection with this one family, this one campaign?
There would be intense moments where it was night and day. Sometimes you would do a 14, 15-hour day preparing for meetings with Lord Advocates, with Chief Constables, for writing letters, for going to and fro from the family, and other days it would be quiet. So it would be peaks and troughs, but I would say a minimum of 50% of my time during a working week was related to the Sheku Bayoh family.
Can we turn to paragraph 137 of your statement, please?
Sorry, which paragraph?
137. It will come up on the screen as well. You say here, this inequality of arms is an unacceptable curtailing of justice, undermining in the case of Sheku Bayoh and the potential for his family to interrogate the facts and ensure harmful practices were brought to light. The power imbalance between the bereaved Bayoh families and the state was the most significant injustice of the whole investigation process. What many do not realise is the total inequality of arms that flows from the death of Sheku. They had no right to legal aid funding. I acted on a pro bono basis for several years. That brings its own stresses and strains as he poured every resource into trying to hold to account the most powerful institutions in the country. There were times that my firm almost did not survive as I poured everything into trying to stay one step ahead, but vigilant for the battles that lay ahead. This cannot be allowed to pass. This is what happened to the Bayohs despite our advocacy on their behalf and the spotlight we brought to bear on the criminal justice system. What happens to all those families that do not have that? You speak here about an inequality of arms. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, when somebody dies in police custody or in prison custody, often what happens is the family is told not to worry, and they will meet with authorities, with liaison officers, told that don't worry, there'll be an investigation, it'll be robust, it'll be independent, it'll be impartial. Depending on the background of the family, if they're middle class, they will ask questions, and they will try and ask as many questions. If people are poor, if they're vulnerable, they don't know what to ask. So it leaves those authorities to investigate themselves. And by and large, in my experience of nearly 25 years, all the families that we have represented have been left frustrated, angered, and upset because they feel they have been betrayed, they have been lied to, and denied accountability and transparency, and the state covers up for itself. And you have to fight and fight for every piece of paper and every disclosure of information. And that is inequality because, of course, the state has an army of lawyers. We have an army of lawyers sat just where I've been sitting for the last 2 years, all funded at the public purse from the moment that there's a death in custody. They are all there. And the family, of course, is not entitled to that because they're told to trust in the state.
You also speak in this paragraph about the stresses and strains of acting pro bono. You say that there were times that your firm almost didn't survive. Can you say a little more about the stresses and strains?
By taking on a case that people have described as controversial brings its own stresses and strains because you are in the firing line. You have to be the voice for the family. You constantly have to take your client's instructions, fight on their behalf, keep fighting to raise the issue. But in that process, because you're taking up all your time fighting a case for pro bono, it means I'm not doing other paid work. So there was lots of lucrative work that potentially came in my direction that I would have to turn down because I simply didn't have the time to do it. Many people in my profession say I'm not a real lawyer. Well, I regard this as the law field that I practice in. And what it would mean is that I know on several occasions when the family had no resources, they didn't have money, they wanted to give up. I remember Caddy and Addy sent me a letter. And I remember when I opened that letter because they wanted to give up. And it was the first 6 months. And I remember bursting into tears because I thought, they can't give up. And I said, don't worry, we'll keep going, we'll find a way. And on several occasions, I poured my savings, the money that I'd made for my family, on a number of occasions to keep going, to keep the firm afloat and to keep fighting this case. But of course, people outside there like to call human rights lawyers, legal aid lawyers, ambulance chasers. It's nothing of the sort.
So you've spoken frankly about the financial impact and the steps that you had to take in order to keep your firm afloat during the period of time that you were working pro bono. What impact did this have on you personally?
It had a huge impact. It wreaks havoc on your personal relationships because you become so focused on fighting this case and trying to see it to the finishing line. I remember when I met with the family, I said, we're in for the long haul. I knew that from many years before the Surjit Singh Choker case. I naively told Mrs. Choker it'll take 6 months to a year. When I was a final year law student, it took 16 years, 3 trials, a change in the law to get justice. And now we're on, nine and a half years nearly. So on a personal basis, it puts me in the fire line, and people confuse what I do because if I'm speaking, I've taken the oath, so speaking honestly, and I've never had to say this in public. But my profession, members of my profession, members of the media see this. They see the colour. And they like to say that they don't see colour. What they mean is they see the family's colour and they see my colour and they think it's the same. And so you face the racism, but you're not allowed to respond. I was taught that many years ago by the lawyers for Stephen Lawrence family. You will be baited. You will be attacked. They will say they are coming for you, but never respond. So you have to develop a thick skin. And people always go, it's about Aamer Anwar. But I never once in 25 years have I ever complained about an act of racism personally in my profession against me. So you have to deal with the arguments, people telling you they know the facts when actually they don't know the facts. You have to advocate on behalf of the family. And I say causes havoc in your personal relationships. It causes havoc because you are relentless in trying to get to the end line and people don't understand it. It's lonely. And it has been a lonely fight over many years because there were so many people. I'm blessed by the team that I have around me, but for so many years, for the last 25 years, the battles that I've fought and the campaigns I've fought have been on my own. I've often had to go south of the border to seek advice from others to say, what do I do? Because when I turned around to the profession here, there wasn't anyone. In the last few years, I am blessed by the team that I have around me, but before that, there was nobody. But in this case, it caused huge strain because on occasions, I know on the final occasion before the inquiry started, I had a nervous breakdown. You know, my life was an absolute mess and everything fell apart. I couldn't let my children know what had happened to me. I couldn't let my family know. I didn't see my mother for several months because I had to build myself back up and get ready for what we knew would be the fight of their life for the Sheku Bayoh family, but I also could not let the family know what I'd done. But you're pushed into such a position that you're paranoid. Justifiably, my anxiety, my paranoia built up over years has meant that it's a form of self-protection. But you're constantly check one thing, check it again, rewrite your speech, rewrite the words, check with the family, make sure, because you know one slip of the tongue and this system will pull you down. This system will do you for professional misconduct. This system will declare contempt of court. This system will say, that's the end of your career. And in the worst scenario, you're going to prison. So I'm always on the watch for that. Always on the watch, making sure that I always say to students when I do lectures to Black or Asian students, you have to work 10 times harder. You have to prove yourself 10 times harder. And in fact, it's for the females in our profession that have also had to go for that process. And that's the only analogy I can say when people say, oh, there's no racism. It's a level playing field. It's a level playing field for a lot of people here today, not a level playing field for people of my colour or the people sat in the public gallery.
Given the financial impact and the personal stresses and strains of undertaking pro bono work, which you've spoken about in your evidence very frankly, why do you continue to do this work, and in particular, why did you continue to represent Mr. Bayoh's families on a pro bono basis?
In 1991, in November 1991, when I was a young student who'd got involved in campaigning and politics at university, I'd always thought I would leave Glasgow and go home to Liverpool and then on to London. And I became involved in student politics. And I was the victim of a racist attack by Strathclyde police. I was taken behind a lane. I was chased. I was putting up posters for any of those who say I was committing a criminal offence. It was a criminal offence that was punishable by £21 under the Environmental Protection Act for putting up a fly poster. It wasn't worth the time or the energy for the police officers normally to do anything. But in this case, I was chased, pushed to the ground, my head repeatedly slammed off the pavement, my teeth smashed out, and my head pulled back again and smashed, and I passed out. And I was taken back into Ashton Lane. I was laid down, and when I opened my eyes, my mouth was bleeding. I couldn't feel teeth in the top row of my mouth. I was terrified. I had grown up in Liverpool, and I thought, I'm going to be one of those black boys that dies in the back of a police van. And I remember that night asking the question from the police officer, why? And he says, before I was kicked in the face, this is what happens to black boys with big mouths. And I remember those 4 years, I took on a civil action, and my lawyer said to me at that time, no black or Asian person has ever won a civil action against the police in this country for a racist attack. I remember naively saying at that time, and I still hope I've got a bit of naivety, I said, just because they haven't doesn't mean you can't. And I went on to win that case. And in that time, I was arrested some 20, 25 times. I had several court trials. It was constant. It was constant move house, warrants for your arrest, constant harassment from the police. And when I won it, I decided I'm going back to law school. And one of the first cases, and I thought, I need to give something back. I need to do something because I learnt the hard way. And I also genuinely believe that if you fight, justice is never handed to you on a plate by our politicians and with the greatest respect to judges, but ordinary people fight for it. And they come together, and that's why there's trade unionists here. That's why there's politicians here. It's people that come together. And I believe that I had something to give back, and I wanted to fight because I learnt, there was 2 lessons learnt that night. One was that freedom and justice isn't handed to you on plate, but the second lesson learnt probably by the police was that this black boy's mouth just got bigger as the years went by, and I've just and I have to say, what makes me go on? It's the families I represent that inspire me every single day, that even when you don't want to get up, when you have your darkest moments, you go, you've got to keep going because they keep going, so you keep going. And who else is going to do that work? Who else in Scotland does this work? People complain and moan about me, but I don't see anybody else volunteering to do it.
And indeed, you conclude this paragraph, paragraph 137, by asking what happens to all those families that do not have that. And that, I think, is a reference to families who do not have pro bono representation. And I think you may have intended that as a rhetorical question, but is it a question to which you know the answer?
The only answer to that question should be, I hope, that this government realizes that families cannot be expected to take on the might of our public institutions, the most powerful institutions in this country, and expect to get answers from them without the right to legal representation. It is unfair, it is unequal, it's an abuse of their human rights, and sadly, we still don't have that. There's no automatic legal aid funding, because I know, of course, then there'll be a line of lawyers who'll want to queue up and do this sort of work. But until then, it's very, very limited. I could probably count on one hand individuals that will take up these cases in Scotland.
Let's look at this juncture at Lady Angelini's report of the Independent Review of Deaths and Serious Incidents in Police Custody. That was in England and Wales. That's SBPI 00496. Published in 2017. If we could perhaps go to page 193 of the PDF and scroll down to paragraph 15.2. So this is a chapter headed up Family Support, where Lady Angelini states the involvement of families in the process should not be seen as a matter of being sympathetic or benevolent to bereaved relatives. It is the duty of the state to ensure their participation is meaningful. In order to facilitate such participation, families need free legal advice, assistance, and representation from the earliest point following the death, and this should be non-means tested. Is that a sentiment with which you would agree?
Absolutely, 100%. Both the Bayoh family and the many families I've represented over the years said they don't care about the tea and sympathy and the biscuits that they met with at meetings and the holding of hands and the offer of tributes to their dignity and their courage. What they want is the truth. They want accountability, and fundamentally they want justice. And until we have that changed in this country, it's going to be difficult to get to.
Let's move forward to page 195 and look at paragraph 15.7. Here, Lady Angelini records, when an individual is arrested and taken into custody, certain legal rights, including the right of access to legal advice, flow from that status. The most serious prospect that could ever arise for an arrestee from the fact of being arrested is death, and yet, paradoxically, that event does not trigger the provision of immediate access for next of kin of the deceased to legal advice. The immediate aftermath of a death in custody is the point of the process, more than any other, when families are in urgent need of advice, support, and information about their rights and the processes that will ensue over the coming days and months. And again, is that a statement with which you would agree?
Absolutely.
Let's look at the recommendation that Lady Angelini makes on page 238, paragraph 33. This is the list of her recommendations, and recommendation 33 reads as follows: in order to facilitate their effective participation in the whole process, there should be access for the immediate family to free, non-means-tested legal advice, assistance, and representation from the earliest point following the death and throughout the pre-inquest hearings and inquest hearing. This is a reference, of course, to the English procedure. Again, would you agree with that recommendation?
Absolutely.
I want to move on to ask you some questions about your first meeting with the Bayoh families, and I wonder if we can look at paragraph 40 of your statement. Again, we'll bring that up on the screen. I understand that you were instructed by the families on the 4th of May, Mr. Anwar, but your first in-person meeting with them was on the 5th of May, the next day.
Yes.
And here in your statement, you say, one of the things that still stands out for me is that at that meeting with the Bayoh family, I said to them, the elephant in the room will be racism, because the family were speaking about racism. It has very much occupied their minds. They believed it's because he was black that he died. They believe that the overwhelming force that had been used on him was because of the colour of his skin. They believed that he was being criminalised in his life in order to justify his death. And when I said that we could not publicly mention the word racism, there was an outburst in the room. I tried to explain, because of the lessons I learnt from the past, about how the system just comes tumbling down and they'll say, Aamer's playing the race card. Where's your facts for it? That we must bide our time, but I wrongly assumed that the Crown would have learned lessons and the issue of race would be front and centre in any investigation. How wrong I was. We can continue and look at paragraph 41 as well, please. I didn't know until very recently that when the family actually left that meeting, they thought about not instructing me because they were so angry and upset that I said we are not going to address the issue of race publicly. I'd like to ask you some questions arising out of these two paragraphs. I said that we could not publicly mention the word racism. What do you mean by publicly in this context?
I meant as in the family wanted to go public. They wanted to utilise the media. They wanted to meet the politicians. They wanted to meet the Lord Advocate. They wanted to meet the Chief Constable. In all of these engagements, the media would be present. There would be public meetings. They wanted to campaign and they wanted to get to the truth. Within the first 24 hours, the family thought there was something seriously wrong. They had been told 5 different versions of events. And for me, very much, I'd learnt my lesson from 20 odd years previously, 15 years previously, in the Choker case, where 1998 Surjit Singh Choker is murdered. I come out on behalf of the family at the STUC headquarters with the backing of the Lawrence family, and we call it a racist murder. It took 16 years for us to prove the racial motivation, 2 collapsed trials, an inquiry that we called a whitewash, an inquiry that condemned me for manipulating the family, which simply wasn't true, said that I played the race card in some respects. Many people said, newspapers, etc. I was called a liar, I was humiliated publicly, and again, I couldn't say anything publicly. I didn't defend myself. And it took till 16 years later for it to be proved it was a racially motivated murder. So for me, I'd learnt my lessons over the years once I trained as a lawyer that, don't mention it, because people assume that I shout my mouth off and go, it's racist, it's a racist murder. Well, in all the cases, I haven't done that. You've mentioned the cases there, Choker, Simon San, Imran Khan, many of the race cases in Scotland that have been at the heart of campaigning. And over those years, I've learnt the lesson to say, as a lawyer, we must see the facts. I also, incidentally, genuinely said to the family, trust in the Crown Office, trust in the perk. They will be robust, they will be transparent, they will be accountable. Because obviously, a year later, I had worked very closely with the Crown, with President Lord Mulholland, Leslie Thompson, the Solicitor General, to get and campaign for justice for the Surjit Singh Choker family. So I genuinely believed that the system had changed, and I said trust in them. But bit by bit, that trust was shattered, and eventually, some 4 or 5 months later, the race word came to the fore. But I kept saying, they'll do it. Let's just see what they do. It's not for us. They're to run the investigation. After all, I didn't have the resources. I didn't have access to the information. I didn't have the disclosure of all the documents we now have, in which they lied and told us we're doing this and we're doing that. It's only now we know they didn't investigate race. Never even came into their sights. It's only when I kept raising it, then they went, oh, we'll tell them to investigate it. And that's when we knew it's too late.
Can we go back to paragraph 40, if we could have that on the screen again, please. The bottom part of that paragraph where you say, I tried to explain because of the lessons I learnt from the past about how the system just comes tumbling down and they'll say Aamer's playing the race card. Where's your facts for it? And you've explained that the reference there to learning lessons from the past goes back to your time campaigning on behalf of the Choker family. When you say in your statement, Mr. Anwar, they'll say Aamer's playing the race card, who is they?
They are the Crown Office, the perk, the police, and the Scottish Police Federation, because they all seemed to work hand in hand when it came to the so-called investigation into the death of Sheku Bayoh. They all seem to work. If one institution can't do it, they'll pass the information on to the other. They'll run along and say, They're the ones who can deal with this in the media. We might not be able to say it, but we can get the Scottish Police Federation to say it. If the Scottish Police Federation can't say it, somebody else will say it. So they, to me, as a person of colour and represented the family, was that the treatment very much was the same from all parties concerned, because it wasn't the tea, biscuits and sympathy. Some were very good at that, others were not, some were extremely arrogant. The problem was that all of them fundamentally failed to deliver justice and failed to deliver truth and accountability to the families. So that's why it becomes the criminal justice system in this country is institutionally racist.
Let's look at paragraph 42. And this follows on from the passage where you explained that you told the family that racism were not to be mentioned publicly. And you explain here, I did it tactically for a reason. I thought, let's gather the evidence. Let's see how the COPFS and PERC deal with the issue of race. After all, it was their responsibility. It should not have to be me to have to constantly remind them of their duties and good practice. They had to be given a chance. But as I said repeatedly in public, nothing should be done to prejudice the investigation. The responsibility rested in the hands of the Crown and the PERC to consider race. Bearing in mind that the issue of race had been flagged up on the very first day by the family directly to the police and then to the flows. It's not, as in, if they see it, they'll deal with it. No, it should be a primary issue. It was recognised in Stephen Lawrence, it should be primary. It's not rocket science. A black man is dead on the street, so consider if his colour had a role to play. After all, not one police officer could resist using the word black multiple occasions in their statements, yet expected the family to believe on their return to the station and then the canteen that not one person considered the issue of race. When you say at the beginning of this paragraph, I did it tactically for a reason, is that a reference to your advice to the family not to mention race publicly?
Yes.
Okay. And can you explain what you mean when you say I did it tactically for a reason?
I knew that if they mentioned the word race, or I mentioned it on behalf of them, the sole focus would once again become me. It would be, as what I was called for years prior to this case, race row lawyer, race lawyer Aamer Anwar, rather than human rights lawyer. So I thought, first of all, it's not about me. It's not about, we don't have the evidence. We had said to the Lord Advocate, we'd said to the PERC, we want a robust, transparent investigation. And the family, repeatedly, I said at press conferences, the family have faith in the PERC. The family have faith in the Crown Office to carry out a robust and transparent investigation. Because ultimately, I explained to the family, there is only one institution that can deliver a prosecution of these officers. It is the Crown Office. So of course I had to say to the family, trust in them. This is years later. Of course they've changed. We will get justice. The family will get justice. So tactically, for a reason, I thought it's presentation, and it's also extracting information from the Crown and from the PERC and saying to them, the family is backing you. Family's backing you, but putting pressure on the Crown and the family saying, the caveat is you cannot fail. You cannot fail again, like you have done in every other case that involved a person of colour in this country.
So this was a tactical decision, a deliberate decision to sit back and see how the Crown and the PERC addressed the issue of race.
It wasn't ever a case of sit back, because I think, as the inquiry has seen from the very offset, my letters were robust, they were comprehensive. I almost felt like I was leading the Crown by the hand and saying, what about this, what about that, what about that? And by and large, they would ignore it and then would try again, and it'd be weeks upon weeks of trying letters and meetings to do that. But tactical for a reason, as in, it's their job to investigate, it's not my job. I was a pro bono lawyer. I didn't have a team of lawyers. I do have a team who, over the years, also worked pro bono and came around, but in the beginning, there was nobody else. It was me on my own.
Let's look at paragraph 26 of your statement, please. Before I read this paragraph out, you refer to two individuals in this paragraph. Doreen Lawrence. She, I believe, is the mother of Stephen Lawrence, and Stephen was murdered in a racially motivated attack in 1993. And you refer to Imran Khan KC, who, when he was a solicitor, I believe, represented the family of Stephen Lawrence during the public inquiry. Is that right?
That's right.
Just to give context to what you say. And you also mention Michael Mansfield as an explanation in the paragraph as to who he is.
And they still represent Doreen.
Yes. Similarly, Doreen Lawrence's senior counsel, Michael Mansfield KC, said to me when I started the Chokar campaign, "It's fine for me. I'm white, I'm middle class. I'm seen as a knight in shining armour who rides to the rescue of these poor, vulnerable black people. But when you do it, Aamer, or Imran does it, you're playing the race card. You must prepare to be attacked, and you will always be accused of having got an ulterior motive." I have to say, this has been my experience to date. The treatment, the exclusion by members of my profession, combined with constantly being on high alert as you wait to be falsely accused, vilified, or humiliated, but never able to speak out on what I believe to be racism, because otherwise I fall into the trap by taking the bait and allow powerful forces such as the Scottish Police Federation will say, "Oh, look, he's playing the race card, it's all about Aamer Anwar." Or, for example, accused by a good friend of theirs, former Justice Minister Kenny McCaskill, of using the Bayoh case to keep my profile high, adding that the ongoing controversy was good for business. So you speak here of your experience of being excluded, falsely accused, vilified, humiliated, and unable to speak out about what you believe to be racism. And you have, of course, represented families of a number of individuals who have lost their lives in circumstances where race was or may have been a factor. And in your statement, you mentioned some of the families that you have represented, including, of course, the family of Surjit Singh Chokar. So your experience is broader than your experience of representing the families of Mr. Bayoh. I'd like to ask what impact your experience has had on you personally.
It's like I say that from the moment I became a lawyer, I felt I was under attack. Even people who had nothing to do, for instance, with the Choker case. It seemed as though every member of my profession wanted to have a say and tell me how I was wrong. Tell me how this is not how we do things in this country. Lawyers don't stand up and criticize the system. I would walk into rooms, and I felt that feeling even the first day I walked into this inquiry, and I walked through there to take my seat there. And I looked at my colleagues and how they look at you. And it's a feeling I've had my whole life of my profession. People say, "You're paranoid." It's not paranoia. It's served me right, because I know exactly how they talk about me. I know exactly how they look at me. And I know what they say behind my back. And any opportunity to put the boot in, they do it. And at times when you are not able to respond, and as I said, Imran Khan had given me a piece of advice at the start of the Choker case. He said, "You'll be attacked. They will come for you. Do not respond. Do not be baited, because you're falling into the trap of what the state does, because it will become about you rather than the family." On so many occasions, and I quoted there Kenny McCaskill, who was the former Justice Minister, saying, "Keep my profile high and good for business." How little Mr. McCaskill did know. I'm not funded by millions of pounds like the Scottish Police Federation to represent the police officers. We were doing it pro bono. It wasn't good for business. It was bad for business. And that humiliation of constantly having to walk through life and being told you're not a real lawyer, or you're just playing the race card. Saying those words, "playing the race card," is racist in itself, because he wouldn't do it to Michael Mansfield. And that's the point. If lawyers sat there were picking up awards, white lawyers, and fighting for a black family, they would be feted as human rights campaigners. But someone like me, someone like Imran Khan, constantly attacked, told you have an ulterior motive. And I'm going, it's not an ulterior motive. I'm doing my job to the best of my ability. And I've continued to try and do it despite the attacks and the vilification. And it's had a huge toll. You can tell probably from what I'm saying, I am constantly on alert and worry. I have switched off my mobile phone commentary on Twitter. I have the most following on Twitter of any solicitor, I think, in the UK. And yet I have to turn my commentary off, because no matter what I say, you switch it on and you are attacked, you are abused. I have had death threats over the years. And whilst I can't say individuals in the police or the Federation responsible, the fact that the whipping up of the abuse and the racism against me puts me in the firing line, because people go, in this present period where human rights lawyers are being attacked, some attempted murders of individuals, and I have had to move house, I've had my life threatened, and I'm at a stage where I have my children who are of an age who can now read social media. I've protected them my whole life. I've not wanted them to know what their father has to deal with, but they can read for themselves now, and they ask me questions. I have my mother, who I constantly have to tell, who worries herself sick from that night when I was attacked by the police, and say, Mom, don't read it, don't read it. And then when the death threats come in, and who is it I have to turn to ask for help? It's the police. And I remember saying to Ian Livingston, who I built up a relationship over many years with, who was the former chief constable, saying to him one time when they installed a panic alarm, and they put, because it was a direct threat to me. And I said, your police officers won't come. He said, what do you mean? Of course we'll come. I went, they'll find out it's me. They'll wait 30 minutes or an hour, and it'll be too late. So I walk through those streets, and I know that I spend my life thinking, today, is it my last day? When somebody comes up to speak to you, to say something to you, I think, is this it? Is this the moment that I lose my life? And that's a huge burden that I have on my shoulders, and I have never, ever been able to publicly say that. So that's the impact of these cases. And people don't seem to understand what it does to you as a lawyer, but more so as a human being, more so as a father, more so as a partner, and as a friend in relationships, just how you deal on a day-to-day. You're constantly upset. You wake up with this cloud over you. You're worrying all the time.
And again, is this the sort of experience that fed into your advice to the families of Mr. Bayoh not to mention race publicly?
Absolutely, because I did not want them to be attacked. I wanted the Crown to do its job. That's what they're paid to do their public duty and investigate it to the best of their ability. That's what I believed they would do, and how wrong I was.
I'd like to put to you for comment evidence that we heard from Deborah Coles. This is in her inquiry statement, but it's a short paragraph. I don't think we necessarily need it on the screen, although if we have it handy, it's SBPI 00607. Wonderful, and it's paragraph 28. I'll read the paragraph short, but we'll see within that paragraph that Ms. Cole says the question of whether racism had contributed to the treatment of a loved one was invariably in the minds of black families, but not one that most felt they could actually raise, because they feared being seen to play the race card and provoke additional hostility in a process that they experienced from the outset as being hostile and adversarial. Raising the issue of race, families said, could elicit accusations of having a chip on your shoulder, being militant, seen as an angry black family. Does that fit with your own experience?
100%.
And again, if I could perhaps take you to the evidence of Marcia Rigg. If we have her statement to hand, it's 00630, paragraph 108. Thank you. If we could scroll down a little, please. There we are, about 3 lines from the top of the page. My family felt it was obvious racism was there, but we decided not to raise the issue of racism because we didn't want to be labelled with a chip on our shoulder and to be using the race card. And Marcia Rigg, of course, is the sister of the late Sean Rigg. Again, how does her experience fit with your own?
It matches it completely, 100% in agreement, every word that she said.
I'd like to move on now to look at a press statement that was issued on behalf of the Bayoh families following a conference on the 14th of May 2015. And a good starting point, I think, would be to return to your statement and look at paragraph 203. Let's begin by reading this paragraph, Mr. Anwar, and then we'll look at the press release itself. I have been asked about the Bayoh family press conference on 14 May 2015 and the subsequent press release from the Scottish Police Federation. We arranged a press conference to take place on 14 May 2015, which is around the corner from Crown Office in Chambers Street. I read out a statement which was subsequently issued as a press release. I was very careful in what I said. I've explained to the family that I'm not going to mention the word race, that we have to give the Perk and the Crown the opportunity to carry a full-scale investigation without being hindered or speculated upon. This was a live investigation. I was very much viewing it that this was a live criminal investigation. Nothing must be done to prejudice it. At that point in time, I don't know what the position is because the police officers haven't given statements. I have my own suspicions. I believe overwhelming force has been used. I believe he's in a mental health crisis from what I've heard, but I still don't know. So let's look at the press release. It's AAC 00387. This is 4 pages long, but quite large print and double-line spacing. So what I'd like to do is go through it with you quite quickly. I think it's important that we capture all of this press release. So we see this forms part of a press pack for the conference on the 14th of May. And you note that a meeting will take place with the Lord Advocate at 11:30 a.m. in private, and that a statement would be made following the meeting. Was that the order of events? Did the meeting take place first and the press conference happen afterwards? You go on to list the family members who would be present with you at the press conference, and then there is the text of the statement itself. You introduce yourself as the solicitor acting on behalf of the families, and you introduce Colette and Caddy. You then begin just at the bottom of the screen as we see it just now by saying, I'd like to start by making a statement on behalf of the family. Sheku Bayoh was a well-liked, peaceful and healthy young man who at the age of 31 had no previous history of violence. It would appear he left his home sometime between 7 and 7:30 a.m, walking an approximate distance of a mile. The family is advised that police officers who were in the midst of a shift change at Kirkcaldy Police Office responded to an alert following calls from members of the public. We are advised that some 6 police cars went to the scene and that a minimum of 9 uniformed officers engaged with Mr. Bayoh. Of course, any use of force must at all times be lawful, necessary and proportionate in the circumstances. Reports of any officer having been stabbed are simply untrue. Mr. Bayoh was detained and restrained with handcuffs to the rear and leg restraints, following which he lost consciousness. CPR was attempted at the scene, an ambulance called, and he was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital at 9:04 a.m. Following Sheku's death, 5 different versions of events were given to the family by Police Scotland officers over the course of 10 hours until they were finally told he had died in police custody. That is a matter of grave concern. Sensitive and thorough handling of the investigation in the golden hours following the death is critical to evidence gathering and setting the direction and quality of the investigation to follow. The family has grave concerns with regards to what happened on Sunday. Furthermore, the family does not understand why the officers involved in engaging with Sheku Bayoh were not immediately suspended without prejudice after his death. It is a matter of wider public concern that officers remain at their desks or in contact with the public pending the outcome of the investigation into a death in custody. For the Chief Constable to suspend the officers without prejudice is not a question of prejudging the outcome of the investigation, but ensures neutrality, integrity of the investigation, transparency, as well as protecting officers involved in such incidents. The Bayoh family understands that neither Perk nor the Lord Advocate can enforce such a decision and would strongly urge Chief Constable Stephen House to take full control of the situation. The family welcomed the Lord Advocate's instruction last on Tuesday to Perk to take over the whole investigation into the death of Sheku Bayoh. However, they were saddened to learn that some 11 days after Sheku's death, that Police Scotland has still not provided all the essential information to Perk's investigation team. This approach simply beggars belief and prolongs the agony of Sheku's family. I would strongly urge police officers to cooperate with the investigation to help provide Mr. Bayoh's family, the Crown Office and the Perk with accurate information about how and why Mr. Bayoh died. The family are trying to remain open-minded, but neither the Crown pathologists or our own independent pathologists can reach a conclusion into the cause of death until a full account of what happened that morning is given by the police officers who detained Mr. Bayoh. Sorry, if we can scroll a little, please. Thank you. There has been a great deal of speculation in both the papers and the local community, none of which is helpful in a live inquiry. The family retain full confidence in the PERC and would urge both police officers and members of the public who have information to come forward and fully cooperate with PERC's investigation. The findings of the post-mortem are not complete and could take several more weeks to complete. We have instructed some of the UK's most eminent pathologists to act independently on behalf of the family. They will offer every assistance to the Lord Advocate's team, as we are aware that such deaths in custody are a rare occurrence in Scotland. Today the family are putting their total faith and trust in the Lord Advocate and PERC. There are many grave concerns that the family will express in private to the Lord Advocate later on this morning, which cannot be mentioned due to a live inquiry. Crown Office Police Scotland and PERC must now act decisively to restore confidence and satisfy the need for a robust and demonstrably independent investigation. Nobody should be allowed to evade accountability or frustrate the investigation process. Sheku Bayoh's family will not rest until they have the truth. So that was the text of the press statement that you made on the 14th of May 2015 on behalf of Mr. Bayoh's families. Did you say anything beyond what is recorded in that statement? Did you go off script at all?
No, I don't believe I did. I tried not to. I do remember, I think it was a journalist from The Sun and from The Guardian that tried to ask me about whether race or colour had anything to do with it. I said, we refuse to speculate. There must be a full investigation.
I think you mentioned that, in fact, in your statement at paragraph 204, so if we could perhaps have that on the screen. Paragraph 204 is effectively your commentary on that press release. You say, the content of our press release is not controversial. I've not speculated, it's not hyperbolic, it's not exaggerated. The family is open-minded. I'm not blaming the officers. I'm laying out the facts as are known publicly. I'm not relaying a narrative of the events of what happened. I refuse to engage with that. I ask for police officers to cooperate, people to come forward, and I express concern about officers not being separated in what goes on. I don't even mention the word race. In fact, when I was sitting on the platform, I was asked by 2 journalists about racism. I said, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm not here to speculate. And we've looked at the press release, and race doesn't feature in the press release at all. If we could scroll down to paragraph 206, you say here that within minutes of your press release ending, the Scottish Police Federation and their lawyer were publicly issuing a vivid description of what they claimed to have happened. And we'll return to this paragraph in a moment, but before we do that, let's look at the actual text of the SPF press release itself. That is COPFS 05339. So we see that we'll see shortly that the content of the press release is in an email. Sorry, if we could scroll up again just a moment and stop there, thank you. We see it's dated the 14th of May and time stamped at 12:48. And if we scroll down to the blue text, this is the text of the press release issued on behalf of PBW Law. The rights of the police must be defended, says top lawyer. The legal advisor to the Scottish Police Federation has strongly criticised statements made at a press conference in Edinburgh by the family and lawyers of the late Sheku Bayoh. Professor Peter Watson of PBW Law said, I am disturbed about the unhelpful and ill-informed comments being made by the family lawyer. Whilst it is deeply regrettable that Mr. Bayoh lost his life, I would ask the media and public to remember that a petite female police officer was chased and then subjected to a violent and unprovoked attack by a very large man who punched, kicked and stamped on her. The officer believed she was about to be murdered, and I can say that but for the intervention of the other officers, that was the likely outcome. The family's advisors appear to believe that the police do not have the same legal rights as other members of the public. They do, and I intend to defend those rights robustly. We all seek the truth, and part of that truth will lie in part in the post-mortem and toxicology reports which will follow in due course. Calls for the suspension of the officers serve no purpose and do nothing but add unhelpful rhetoric in a difficult situation for all. So I wanted to look at the actual text before we return to paragraph 206 of your statement, in which you offer a comment on the text here. So let's look at your statement, and I'll perhaps ask you some further questions after we have done that. So paragraph 206. So if you scroll perhaps to the top of the next page, you begin here by quoting from the press release, and it's Peter Watson's statement, "I'm disturbed about the unhelpful and ill-informed comments being made by the family lawyer." You say, what's he disturbed about? What was unhelpful and what was ill-informed? There's absolutely nothing in that statement that he issues on that could know was ill-informed. He's assumed what I'm going to say. It was an attack on my professionalism, on my credibility and integrity. Ultimately, it was attack on the family, is the way that I see it. It was to try and shut them down. So before we go any further, let me ask you some questions about what is written in that part of that paragraph. You say that there was nothing in your press release that was ill-informed, and that you consider that an assumption had been made about what you were going to say. And you'd said at the beginning of paragraph 206 that this press release was made within minutes of yours. Is it your belief that the statement was made before Mr. Watson had heard your statement to the press, or after?
I can't be clear about that, but what I would say is actually one that I know that was made around about 11:15, 11:20, which I think was Brian Doherty from the Scottish Police Federation. The terminology that Mr. Doherty used was practically identical in parts to that made by Mr. Watson. But it seemed to me that they had a pre-prepared script, because this was coming from Jack Irvin's Media House, Peter Watson, Callum Steele, Brian Doherty, and others were obviously involved in putting together a press release. And I, for the life of me, thought, they're just assuming this is Aamer Anwar of 2000, coming out on the steps of the High Court, attacking the Crown, attacking the police. I'm thinking, here he goes again, he'll play the race card. This will be, he'll be ill-informed, unhelpful, I'll be on the attack. And there was nothing of the sort, because I was talking about wanting witnesses to come forward, for police officers to cooperate. I was saying that any force used, which was helpful, because I said police officers, of course, are entitled to defend themselves, but any force used has to be lawful, legitimate, proportionate. I mentioned the fact that despite the police source that was never found, that no police officer was stabbed, which is always the case. After a death in custody, lies are told, and then all of a sudden nobody can find out who from the police told them that. And I said that police officers should be suspended without prejudice. I could not for the life of me see how these 7, 8, 9 officers were putting the canteen together after Sheku's death, how that was helpful. If they were members of the public and one of them was a potential accused, there's no way they would be put in a room together. They would be separated and taken in for questioning. And in fact, that was the case on the day. Colette was taken in separately. Saeed was taken in separately. Martin was taken in separately. His partner was taken in separately. They had facilities for them, but they put all the police officers together. And Mr. Watson, if there was anybody who was unhelpful and ill-informed, it was Mr. Watson, because he set out a narrative on the 14th of May when the multiple police officers that he was representing, all of them, hadn't given a statement. So it was almost like, here's the party line, this is what happened, and we're sort of wondering, what the hell is going on? Because this is already put in the public domain when all we're asking for is police officers to cooperate and give their statements if they are police officers. And of course, we were told pretty much from the first couple of days that the police officers were told that they had witness status. And we're constantly asking every day, have they given a statement? Have they given a statement? Because of course, it's the police officers that would be speaking about what happened. And if they had nothing to hide, then they had nothing to fear. And with the greatest respect to Mr. Watson, police officers are not the same as members of the public. So there was nothing unhelpful, there was nothing ill-informed, there was no rhetoric in what I had to say.
You say in your statement that you saw this as an attack on your professionalism and your credibility and integrity. Can you explain why you saw it that way?
If any lawyer sat back there representing the PERC, the Federation, the Chief Constable, the Lord Advocate, the Crown Office were told that their comments were ill-informed, they would be upset, I think, professionally. If they were told that they were using rhetoric, they would be upset. They would be kicking up a stink about it. But it seemed to me as though anything can be said about me publicly. I can be called a liar. I can be called I'm playing the race card as I'm down the line. Eventually, I'm ill-informed comments, and it's on me. And I'm going, what to do? But what do I do? It's a case of I can't get into a boxing match with Mr. Watson. I can't do that publicly because I have to remain focused on the family. Cannot be diverted into that. We maintain the line. Trust in the Crown and the PERC to carry out an independent, robust, transparent investigation for the police officers to cooperate and give their statements. The family wanted to know that the police officers have done that. And of course they weren't. But meanwhile, they're seeing this narrative being played out that a policewoman would have been murdered, subjected to a violent and unprovoked attack by a very large man who was 5'10", 12 stone, 10 pounds, and was smaller than me at the time. I was going, there was actually 2 officers that were bigger than him, 6'4", up to 25 stones each, which we weeks later found out. So, and he says, but for the intervention of other officers, that was a likely outcome. How did Mr. Watson know that? Full investigation hadn't been carried out. How did he know that? How informed was he? Was he sitting there? Was he watching from the window? Was he a member of the public? Or did he just simply take the script from his officers, who of course are involved in the death of Sheku Bayoh?
Returning to your statement, the passage that you've just alluded to and the comment made by Mr. Watson is at the bottom of paragraph 206, but if we could read on to the top of 207, please. He's expressing an opinion as to the potential outcome. It begs the question, as a lawyer, why is he personally commenting? It's not about his personal belief. We don't even have statements at that time from the police officers. And I think the personal comment that you were critical of is where Mr. Watson says the police officer believes she was about to be murdered, and I can say that but for the intervention of the other officers, that was a likely outcome. Help me to understand why you're critical of that comment.
Well, I think it wasn't just that. I don't think it was just that comment. I think it was all of it. It's about violent, unprovoked attack because, of course, for years the family have had to deal with until the public inquiry came. It was portrayed in public that Sheku Bayoh, a very large black man, subjected police officers to a violent and unprovoked attack. And people have always assumed that Sheku was the first to go on attack. And of course, we now know that the real facts are that's not true. He was subjected to CS spray. He was subjected to powder spray. He was hit with the baton. He was shoulder barges. And then after that, there was an incident with Nicole Short. So that's the first part, the setting of the scene. Not that this comes afterwards, because that's almost what's been portrayed. And then it's to say she was about to be murdered. And I could say, but for the intervention of other officers, that was a likely outcome. How did he know that? How did he know that? And why was it? Why would that not be seen as interfering with a live investigation? For a lawyer to stand up in the public domain and put those out as a narrative or the facts when the PERC are busy trying to get statements from those police officers. Why would you put that in the public domain? And it's a standard tactic, of course, used by up and down this country, by police lawyers. Get that out first of all, and then you spend your time, as the family did, having to defend Sheku in his death, having to say he wasn't armed. He didn't stab a police officer. He was hit first by CS spray, powder spray. He was the one who was hit with a baton. And then there's a response. So is it violent? Is it unprovoked? That's what the job of the PERC was to find out.
Let's return to paragraph 207. 4 lines down, the press release continues and alleges the family's advisors appear to believe that police do not have the same legal rights as other members of the public. And you say this is completely and utterly untrue. At that time, I was representing multiple police officers and had acted for the Scottish Police Federation in the past. And at that time in my statement, I had said, suspended without prejudice, protecting their rights. They have rights, so I didn't say that. Mr. Anwar, are you aware of anything in your statement that could have been taken as suggesting that police officers do not have the same rights as members of the public?
Absolutely not. I said suspend without prejudice. They, of course, have a right to silence. They should have been separated. They were told, in fact, unlike other members of the public, they were told almost straight away that they had witness status. And then for 32 days, the representatives held out, and it was a public ding-dong that went on between the PERC, and we had to keep going backwards and forwards and saying to PERC, it would be helpful rather than us on behalf of the family having to say they haven't given statements. And the PERC was saying to us, we've told them they have witness status. There was nothing unhelpful with regards to that. And as I say in there, what the Scottish Police Federation probably don't like me to say is that I had represented multiple police officers on that occasion and after that as well. It was fine for them to have me representing police officers, but then to say I don't believe police officers have the same rights. I've always worked on the principle that if I think somebody's done something wrong, then I'll raise the issue. And where police officers have acted within the law, I have represented them to the best of my ability and was doing so at that time in relation to data protection offences and other cases, highly publicised cases, and the Police Federation knew that. I was, of course, invited to Scottish Police Federation dinners, annual dinners, and to speak at their meetings. So all of a sudden, black man dies in police custody and I am the enemy. But I wasn't the enemy before. Why?
Let's look at paragraph 209. You reference here a further press release issued in response to the SPF press release the same day. The Bayoh family were deeply hurt by the tone of the press release issued by the SPF, and they felt insulted and falsely accused. So you explain here how the family felt, but can I ask how you felt? What impact did the SPF or Mr. Watson's press release have on you personally?
Well, it felt like deja vu, and I thought, here we go again. And I had genuinely thought that that press release was prepared with the family. It was there was lots of things taken out. So you can't say that, can't do that. We need to keep it within that, can't speculate. It's a live investigation. We're appealing to the public to come forward, we're appealing to the police officers, let the investigation be carried out. And yet, of course, the Scottish Police Federation or the representatives weren't going to attack the family, just as the same way the Stephen Lawrence family were attacked. Attack the lawyer, the mouthpiece, the advocate on behalf of the family. And yeah, the paranoia was back, because I thought, despite all these years passing, despite me having worked with the system, despite me having represented police officers, it didn't really matter, because when I start to raise a question about the actions of officers, I will come under robust attack. So I was paranoid, I was upset, and it was, again, it was insulting, it was an attack on my integrity, and I was back in the same position of taking the advice. Do not defend yourself. Try not to get into a war with them, a war of words.
I'd like to take you to one or two paragraphs in the statement of Callum Steele to invite your comment. His inquiry statement is SBPI 00556. And Mr. Steele at the relevant time was the General Secretary of the SPF, I believe.
Yes.
And if we can look at paragraph 33 and 35 together, and then I'll invite your comment. 33. The issue here is that from the get-go, this was not any other death in custody, which was obvious, and it was obvious principally because Aamer Anwar made it not about any other death in custody, and the early inference that he was presenting was that police officers had killed Mr. Bayoh because of the colour of his skin. So that was very obviously something that the SPF had to deal with. And if we could scroll down, please, to 35. In terms of Mr. Anwar, inferring Mr. Bayoh was killed by the police because of the colour of his skin at this stage, it has been pointed out this press release was issued about 11 days after Mr. Bayoh has died. I've been asked whether I can recall anything that I read in the press release or any commentary from any other source that led me to that conclusion. Well, in those 11 days, I couldn't point to anything specific, but the general commentary from Mr. Anwar's very early involvement was an inference that the colour of Mr. Bayoh's skin was a contributing factor in his death. Although the example I give here came sometime after his death, it's blatantly obvious that Mr. Anwar was making such an inference. I've already looked at your press release from the 11th of May, and there's nothing in it about race or racism. Could I simply invite your comment on this criticism?
Well, Callum Steele is 100% wrong, and this shows the institutional racism of the Scottish Police Federation that couldn't see beyond my colour, because they assumed automatically, from the very beginning, I was talking about race. Yet you've seen my press release, I had the press conference, the camera crews were there, and I didn't mention race. I avoided the issue. I refused to comment on it. And in fact, I didn't just refuse to comment on it for those 11 days. I kept refusing to comment it for the month of May, for the month of June, and then into July. And then it was, I think, around about September the 15th or October the 15th. I think that's when it went public. And so Mr. Callum Steele is completely and utterly wrong. He can't find anything in my press release that I've mentioned about race, yet they persisted with that argument, not just amongst their colleagues, but publicly, by issuing circulars to over 16,000 police officers, which put me in the firing line, because every police officer in this country thought Aamer Anwar is playing the race card when I was doing the exact opposite.
Can we return to your statement, please, and look at paragraph 213, in which you comment on an SPF press release of the 2nd of June? And the text of that press release is incorporated into the paragraph. So 213, I've been asked about the SPF press release of 2nd June 2015. The press release is drafted as headed, Family Lawyer Heavily Criticised, and states that the comments made by those representing the family of the deceased continue to promote a completely inaccurate and misleading account. The officer injured remains off work, has had several hospital visits and is now in rehabilitation. An examination by a leading consultant confirms her injuries were significant. The injuries have been documented and photographed. The officers involved have never refused to provide statements. It was agreed at the outset with PERC that they would revert to us when they wanted statements and when they were clear on the basis that statements were to be given. Mr. Anwar can try to throw whatever mud he wishes, but the fact remains that a petite female police officer was violently assaulted by a large male and believed she was going to die as a consequence. In directing increasingly hyperbolic, inaccurate and bizarre rhetoric at the Scottish Police Federation, one could be mistaken for believing that Mr. Anwar being at the centre of attention appears to be of greater importance than allowing the investigation to proceed without interference. Now, I understand that you kept copies of all of the press articles relating to the death of Mr. Bayoh, and that those published between the date of his death and the 2nd of June are all included within a single compendium which has the reference AAC 00379. That has been published on our website and is available to the Chair for his consideration. So the Chair can take into account all of the commentary between the date of the death and the 2nd of June. But may I invite your comment on the suggestion here that you had thrown mud?
It's simply not true. Simply not true. In terms of mud, in relation to the officer, Nicole Short, which is who he's referring to, it was Mr. McSporran, the senior investigator for the PERC, that told me at the time, as he sat in the seat opposite me in my office, he says, Aamer, Nicole Short was only in the hospital for 30 odd minutes and then she was back in the station. And then we found out that Nicole Short was back for some up to 7 or 8 hours back in the canteen with her fellow officers. So that was the first thing. And the line, he says, it was agreed at the outset with PERC that the officers involved have never refused to provide statements. Well, that simply is not true. because the PERC kept telling us again and again that we requested statements and they refused. It was only 32 days later that statements were provided. And it seems to be either the PERC are telling the truth or Mr. Watson's telling the truth. Can't be both of them, because it was 32 days later and we were told by the PERC they requested their statements and they were offered witness status. So that was the first thing. Mud, there was no mud thrown. It wasn't hyperbolic, it wasn't inaccurate, it wasn't bizarre, but what that smacks of, for me, is the usual stereotyping that goes on of black or Asian people to try and make out that we're mad, that we're oversensitive, that we're hyperbolic, that we got a chip on our shoulder, that we're playing the race card. That's what that language is about. That's exactly what that language is about.
Let's look at paragraph 214 of your statement. I think I'll read it together with 215. The SPF are personalising it. They're trying to bait me to get me to respond to personal attacks, and I'm trying to resist. But the pressure is unbearable. It's unbearable for me personally, but I'm a lawyer, so I'm expected to take it on the chin. If there's a white lawyer out there, and every week somebody prints an article which just personally attacks you for doing your job, what would they be doing about it? The Law Society would be up in arms. Everybody would be saying, how dare you make an attack? But it seems to me that over the years it's become a case of, oh, it's Aamer Anwar, it's fine, it doesn't have any impact on him personally. So I saw a concerted attempt to break the family, and if they couldn't break the family directly, then indirectly you go for the lawyer, because if you break the lawyer, you break the campaign and you shut it down. I saw that years before with Chokar, and I saw it years before when criminalised by the police for taking them on for smashing a face in a racist attack. And in this, they did every trick in the book. So you say here that it's become a case of, oh, it's Aamer Anwar, it's fine. It doesn't have any impact on him personally. Does this have an impact on you personally?
It does have an impact on me personally, because I keep saying I have to have developed this thick skin. People keep telling me, and it's all very nice, you know, friends, family say, just ignore it, just ignore it. You can't ignore it, because when you shut the door and you're on your own, it comes back to you. When you switch on your phone, when you get a letter threatening you with legal action or threatening the family, you go through your script and say, have I said anything wrong? Have I done anything wrong? Did I check? Because I check my statements again and again and again. I've learnt the hard way after facing contempt of court and being put on trial before the three of the most senior judges in this country for standing up for the rights of my client, that your life can be finished, your professional career, in the worst instance you can be sent to prison. So I know what that feels like, but everybody just does think it's Aamer Anwar. It's a laugh, it's a joke. I'd like to know how every one of those white lawyers sat there would feel if their life was threatened, if they had to have panic alarms installed, CCTV cameras installed because of death threats made to you because you stand up and you fight the cases that I do. There would be uproar. There'll be questions raised in Parliament. But with me, just carries on. If any of these lawyers were subjected to surveillance by the Scottish Police Federation or by Police Scotland, there would be uproar. It would be interference with the rights of a lawyer. But when it comes to Aamer Anwar, of course, oh, it's just part of the course. Nobody's interested. But of course, it's not about me. I keep trying to remember that. And that's hard, because I do instinctively want to fight back. But I have to remember I'm a lawyer representing that family who are sat there and have to ensure that we get it to the finishing line. So over the years, you just keep going and you keep going and try and ignore it. But it has a traumatic effect, because it's upsetting. It breaks you down. I've had a nervous breakdown. I've been close to a breakdown. And I just have to sort of, even when I walk into this room, I'm sat there, I've spent the last 2 years feeling uncomfortable sat there. How people look at you when you walk in the room, the muttering that goes on. I feel that when I go into courtrooms, when people turn around and look at you, the remarks that are made. And I see it when people comment publicly about it or on the commentary pages and feel, don't have to worry, because Aamer Anwar's not going to come back at us. Aamer Anwar's not going to make a complaint. In fact, I remember the Scottish Police Federation, when they went on the attack, I sought legal advice from the Dean of the Faculty of Advocates on how to take out a case for defamation. Several months later, the Dean of the Faculty Advocates was representing the Scottish Police Federation. That's how it works in this country. Did I make a complaint? No, I didn't.
Bear through a moment, please. So I'm going to be moving on to another subject. I wonder if this would be a convenient time for the morning break.
Yes, thank you. We'll take a break for 20 minutes. Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. Mr. Anwar, I'd like to move on to ask you questions about some articles that appeared in the press on the 25th and 26th of July of 2015. To put this in context, I believe that the 25th of July 2015 was the day on which the Justice for Sheku Bayoh campaign was launched. And I understand that you may have made a statement at that launch. We don't appear to have a copy of that statement. However, what was said was reported in a number of the newspapers, online on the 25th, and then in printed version on the 26th. So I would like to take you to those. There are just two articles we need to look at, I think. Let's look firstly at the Sunday Herald of the 26th of July 2015, and this is in another of the compendiums of newspaper cuttings that you provided to the inquiry, AAC 00380. Lovely, thank you. Now, for context, can we look at the second page of the PDF? Sorry, the third page, I beg your pardon. To get our bearings, we'll come back to this in a moment, but we see in handwriting at the top, Sunday Herald, the 26th of the 7th, 15, and we'll see that this appears to be page 3 of that newspaper. If we could scroll on to the next page of the PDF, please, because I think these two pages are maybe the wrong way around. Here we are, the Sunday Herald. We see the 26th of the 7th, 2015, page 2, and there's a special report. And if we scroll down just to get an idea of this, we see a quotation from, I think, Caddy. And if we scroll to the bottom of that page, we see family of Sheku Bayoh launch campaign calling for answers over his death in police custody. And we can see that there's that text box and an image, but otherwise this special report covers all of that page of the newspaper. If we can scroll to the bottom of that page just to get a sense of that. Thank you. And because the pages were back to front, if we could please go to the first page of that PDF, page 3, I think, of the PDF, which is also page 3 of the Sunday Herald. So we see here that this is essentially a two-page spread covering pages 2 and 3 of the Sunday Herald, and page 2 is taken up with the special report plus an image and a text box, and on page 3 there's another image and we can see the concluding paragraphs of the special report, and also the final two columns on the right hand side have the heading Sheku Bayoh death in police custody, the unanswered questions. So it would appear that the journalist, it's the same journalist who drafted the special report, Judith Duffy, has summarised in the final two columns on page 3 of the Sunday Herald a number of unanswered questions. If we could scroll down a little, please. Perfect. I should say I'm working from these newspaper articles because we don't have a copy of the text of what was said by you at the launch of the family's campaign. I don't know whether you might have a copy of that, Mr. Anwar, whether it was prepared in advance as a printed statement that was perhaps issued to the press, and if so, if it might be possible for us to have a copy. It's certainly not in with the press releases.
I could have a look for that to see if there is a copy.
That would be appreciated. Thank you. For today's purposes, we'll work with what has been printed in the press following the launch of the family campaign, Justice for Sheku Bayoh, and the statement that you made on the 25th. So this is Judith Duffy's list of unanswered questions, and we see a number of bullet points, and I'd like to look at the first two. The first one, no knife was found. In the immediate aftermath of Sheku Bayoh's death, reports suggested that the police responded to a call of a man brandishing a knife, and the earliest reports were that a female police officer had been stabbed. But the Bayoh family's solicitor, Aamer Anwar, said it has now been established that when police arrived, Sheku was not carrying a knife, nor was one found on him. And I wanted to ask what the source of that information was that you've put into the public domain, that Sheku had not been carrying a knife at the time that the police arrived and that no knife had been found on him.
Well, the family had spoken to people at the time who lived around Hayfield Road, so they were also a source. The Crown and the Puck provided that information to the family.
And why did you choose to put that information into the public domain?
Because what was the date of this report?
This is the 26th. It was the day of July, 2015. It was the day after the launch of the family campaign.
Okay. So by that point in time, we had been through May, June and July, and the family were going increasingly frustrated with the press reports that were appearing, the attacks on the family, the attempt to paint a narrative, to stereotype, to criminalise, and to blame Sheku for his own death. So the family felt that they needed to defend, because the starting point, of course, was the police source that said that a police officer was stabbed. The way the narrative was framed, as though they didn't miss out, Mr. Watson's narrative, or Brian Doherty's narrative, or Callum Steele's narrative, always missed out that Sheku was unarmed when the police arrived. And that was critical importance because, of course, Sheku was seen with a knife earlier on, but there was no knife when the police arrived. But people assumed he had a knife. And that was the starting point. So for the family, they felt it was important to defend Sheku and his death. Sheku couldn't speak for himself, but they wanted to speak to that and say, he didn't stab anyone, he didn't brandish a knife at the police officers. So for all extent and purposes, when the police arrived, he could have been any black man walking down the street. There are, of course, despite what some police officers may have said, lots of black people who stay in Kirkcaldy. So how did they know? Instead of saying, let's drive the van at him, or jump out the van with CS spray, Pava spray, and just go at him as they did from the offset. No attempt to de-escalate. So that was important for the family to have that out in the public domain, to set the record straight. And I have to say, the family and myself were growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of professionalism and the inability to investigate all the things we were saying to the Perk and to the Lord Advocate. What about this? What about that? And it just seemed to be, even in terms of the weight, big deal made about Sheku's weight. And we kept asking, what was the weight of the officers? It's normal common sense. If you got a man who's lying down on the ground, I would ask, what's the weight of the people on top of him? So the family wanted to defend Sheku in his death.
Let's look at the next bullet point. Why did officers believe they were dealing with a terrorist threat? The family say they have established that police believed they were dealing with a terrorist threat when they attended the incident involving Bayoh. They want to know why this was the case and whether that had any role in his subsequent treatment. Again, what was the source of that information?
That, I think, material appeared in the newspapers, the language that was used, and also obviously the Crown and the Perk spoke to the family. And the question the family, of course, asked was, had it been a white man walking down the street, would they have instantly thought we might be dealing with a terrorist attack? Would they have mentioned Lee Rigby on a Sunday morning in Kirkcaldy? Absolutely not. The family didn't believe it, and they wanted again to say stop building a narrative to justify the death of Sheku Bayoh.
Can we jump to another article now, please, as there's another point that I'd like to ask you about that doesn't feature, for whatever reason, in this particular news report. I wonder if we can go to SBPI 00709, which is a Guardian article actually published on the 25th of July. I think it must have been an online article. It's fairly lengthy. If we could scroll down to the third paragraph, please. Aamer Anwar, the civil rights lawyer acting for Bayoh's family, said at a press conference on Saturday, and I think, in fact, the 25th of July was a Saturday, and I think, again, this is a reference to a statement made by you at the launch of the Justice for Sheku Bayoh campaign on the 25th. Would that seem to be correct?
I believe so.
Let's scroll down, please, to the second page. 4 paragraphs down, there's a quotation here from something you said at the press conference. The family has known for weeks that the first actions of the officers attending on meeting Sheku was to use CS spray, was to use pava spray, a form of pepper spray, was to raise their batons, yet at that point Sheku had done nothing, the lawyer told the press conference. And again, I wanted to ask, what was the source of that information?
Through the family, who had spoken to members of the public who lived on Hayfield Road, the Crown and the Puck, and of course information that was regularly appearing in the media.
And what was the purpose in putting that information into the public domain?
The family, by that point, relationship had become strained with the Puck, and they felt they were not investigating fully. They felt under attack from the Scottish Police Federation and felt the need that they had to defend Sheku in his death and actually set out the narrative as it was, rather than that Sheku just went on a violent and unprovoked attack in an attempt to murder a police officer, when the reality was he was the one in a mental health crisis who needed help, and he was attacked and attacked and attacked and attacked before he did something.
Can we return to your statement, please, and look at paragraph 242? In this paragraph, you refer to a letter that you received from the Deputy Crown Agent Lindsay Miller on the 8th of June 2020. And you've provided the doc ID, but you've also quoted the text verbatim in your statement. So let's work with your statement. Over the last few days, I have seen public comment in social media stating that Sheku Bayoh said, "I can't breathe," in the context of a comparison to recent reports about the death in Minneapolis of George Floyd. In particular, Colette Bell was reported in the Daily Record, published on the 4th of June 2020, as saying, "George Floyd stated, 'I can't breathe,' so did Sheku." Further, in a BBC News interview broadcast on 4th June, your client, Sheku's sister Carrie Johnston, made an identical comparison, also attributing the words, "I can't breathe," to Sheku, just before he passed away. I was extremely surprised and concerned to hear of these remarks in advance of the public inquiry, when none of the witness statements or other evidence in the possession of the Crown contains any reference to Sheku saying to police officers, "I can't breathe." You will be aware of the evidential significance of such a remark had it been made, and of the importance of highlighting such evidence to the experts instructed by the Crown. I should be grateful if you would advise me of the evidential origin of these remarks that have been made to the press and other media, in order that these can be investigated further. Now, if we can scroll to the top of that paragraph, please. And in the first paragraph of the letter, there's a reference to public comment in social media. And I'd like at this juncture to show you a tweet This is SBPI 00705. So if we can pause here, that looks to be a photograph of you. Has this come from your Twitter, as it
Yes.
then was, account? It doesn't appear to have a date stamp on it, but it relates to the death of George Floyd. He died on the 25th of May 2020. So it must be some point after the 25th of May 2020 that the tweet was posted. Let's read what it says. All those horrified at scene of a black man, George Floyd, dying as he struggled to breathe whilst being knelt on by a police officer, should also remember Sheku Bayoh, who said, "I can't breathe," whilst being held down by officers until he died in Kirkcaldy, Scotland, 3rd of May 2015. And then there's a body map showing the location of injuries and what I think might be a still from the Ashley Wise footage, or certainly from Hayfield Road. Is this a tweet that was sent by you, Mr. Anwar?
Yes.
Undated, but following the death of George Floyd. What was the purpose of you posting this tweet?
It was to point out the comparisons between the death of George Floyd and that whilst people in Scotland, police officers, politicians, were all busy taking the knee and talking about Black Lives Matter, it seemed hypocritical for me the fact that we had a black man by the name of Sheku Bayoh that people didn't even know about or weren't even discussing, and pointing out the comparisons and the similarities of what had taken place. In Sheku's case, of course, it was at least 5 officers that were involved in restraining him and putting him to the ground.
Now you state in the tweet, if we could scroll down a wee bit, please. Sheku Bayoh, who said, "I can't breathe," whilst being held down by officers. What was the source of that information?
So I think the source of that information fundamentally, first of all, came from Addy Johnson, who in 2015 had, with I think members of his family, had been going down Hayfield Road trying to gather information and collect evidence. We relayed that information to the Crown in a meeting. The person who also heard that information was April Meakin, who works in my firm as a consultant, senior consultant, and also Dorothy Bain, King's Counsel, who is the present Lord Advocate, who was our counsel for several years. We relayed that information in a meeting with the Crown. And then following that was in 2015, and I've been accused of many things in my time, but I think the exact words of Addy Johnson was that the witness had said to him that he'd met had said the words, "Get off me, I can't breathe." And we have heard evidence in this court of one witness at least who said that she heard him saying, "Get off me," hearing screams that sent chills through her body. And then after that, what happened was on the 19th of February, 2019, in the Victims' Right to Review, which was prepared by myself, by April Meakin, and the present Lord Advocate, I believe I don't have the document in front of me, I haven't looked at it for a long time, but I think at page 20, there was reference to those remarks, and it was placed in the VRR. So, a long time before George Floyd died, and of course, nobody batted an eyelid at Crown Office when we said about Addy having met someone, and this person having said it. Nobody saw it was controversial. And why would it have been controversial? Because if you've got 5 people on top of someone, and he's struggling, and he's screaming, "Get off me," and if he says, "I can't breathe," you would expect that, because of course, he was fighting for his last breath. And it only became controversial to the institutions, to the Crown Office, and to Peter Watson, who was the one who wrote to the Crown Office in exactly the same terms. And then the Crown Office wrote to us. It only became controversial to them because all of a sudden they thought, Aamer's making this up. Aamer's playing the race card. Aamer's trying to get the bandwagon rolling on George Floyd. Well, actually, no, because it started in 2015, but nobody cared in 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19. And then, of course, in 2020, all of a sudden it becomes a big issue. And I never received an apology from Lindsay Miller when it was pointed out to her, "Did you even bother to read the VRR before accusing me of doing this?"
So you say this was information that you received from Addie Johnston back
Yes.
in 2015. You also say the information was passed on to the Crown Office at a meeting. Was that meeting in 2015?
That meeting was in 2015, and I remember at that stage what happened was members of the public had complained about a black man coming to the door trying to collect information. The PERC contacted me. I then, again, at that point in time, it was early on, in the summer of 2015, I think, I don't remember the exact date, I'd said to Addie and to the family, you need to stay away. Do not interfere with the live investigation. You could prejudice it. We don't want you having contact. Let the PERC get on with their jobs. Of course, subsequent to that, then the family came back to me because we found out that the Scottish Police Federation, John Sallins working on behalf of Peter Watson, were busy going door to door, making allegations against Sheku Bayoh, and they weren't being stopped. But I had told the family robustly, back off, let the investigation get on with its job. And that was at that time that Addie met with that witness.
So we should understand that at some point in 2015, Addie Johnston had been approaching people who lived on Hayfield Road, looking
Yes.
for information about the circumstances
Yes.
of Sheku's death. So you had this information in 2015. It was provided to Crown Office officials at a meeting in 2015 at which both Dorothy Bain and April Meekin were also present.
It was provided firstly to myself, to April Meekin, and to Dorothy Bain, and then I think when we had a meeting, I can't remember who else was in the meeting. I think Dorothy may well have been there, may not have been there, but the point was that Addie was there and this information was provided in the presence of the family. So it was something that was done, but nobody thought it was controversial. Nobody's interested in the family saying can't breathe, because you already had witnesses saying get off me, sent chills from my body, screaming like an animal. It wasn't a big deal. It became a big deal later on. They went, how did you do that? And I went, why don't you go and check? About a year before we said to you in the VRR, and you didn't make a point about it then. But George Floyd dies, and all of a sudden the words I can't breathe is something that reflects of what every black person who's died in police custody has felt when multiple police officers have restrained them. Of course they can't breathe. What else happens? I know it when I've got little children and I say to them, get to the oldest ones, get off the wee one. They can't breathe. It's automatic. A trained police officer would have known that. But for them this was controversial. There was nothing controversial about it till after 2020.
Coming back to the meeting in 2015 with the Crown Office, who was at the meeting from the Crown Office side?
I'm trying to think, but I don't know if it was, I think Lindsay Miller may have been there, Les Brown, and I don't know if the Lord Advocate at that time had changed to James Wolfe, but I think those individuals would have been there.
The letter, of course, drew your attention to the evidential significance of the statement and asked that you advise the origin of the remarks so that the Crown Office could investigate further, but your evidence is that that information was provided back in 2015, and you also refer to the VRR. So just to get our bearings here, I wonder if we can look at the VRR. It has been heavily redacted because our terms of reference don't permit us to examine that process. But I wonder if we can look firstly at the email to which the VRR was attached, that's COPFS 03106. So this is an email sent on the 1st of February of 2019, subject VRR made on behalf of the family of Sheku Bayoh. It's not clear who issued the email. The name has been redacted. Would that, however, have been issued by your office?
I think it would have been the Secretary office, and I apologise, I got the date wrong. It was the 1st of February 2019, not 19th of February 2019.
Okay. And we see that it's been sent to Les Brown and the Secretary for the Lord Advocate and Secretary for the Solicitor General, Lindsay Miller and others. Good afternoon, everyone. I enclose here with VRR template with supporting application form and attached document with reasons set out requesting a review into the decision not to take proceedings against officers of Police Scotland in relation to the death of Sheku Bayoh. So my purpose in looking at this email is just to get the date stamp, because I believe that the paperwork attached is undated, but we can see here that it was submitted on the 1st of February 2019. Let's now have a look at the VRR paperwork. COPFS 00199. Again, this has been heavily redacted. Just to get our bearings, we can see from the title at the top, request for review of a decision not to prosecute, Section 4 of the Victims and Witnesses Scotland Act 2014 on behalf of the family of Mr. Bayoh. And if we can scroll to the bottom of page 19, please. So AJ, is that Addie Johnston?
Yes.
Addie Johnston attended at Locus later and took photographs of area which we have, spoke with residents on street, believes lady at Hayfield Road may have heard SB saying, "Get off me, I can't breathe." So we see a written record here of that information being provided in the VRR on the 1st of February of 2019. And that, of course, was a year before, more than a year before George Floyd's death. Now, what's recorded here, Mr. Anwar, is that Addie believes that a lady at Hayfield Road may have heard Sheku Bayoh saying, "Get off me, I can't breathe." The tweet suggests that Sheku Bayoh did, as a matter of fact, say, "I can't breathe." And I wonder what steps you took to confirm that the information that we see here in the VRR was accurate before putting it in the public domain.
Well, in the first instance, Addie Johnson had met with the resident. He had told me that was his belief, that that's what was said. We heard evidence from a witness that came to this inquiry that said that Sheku Bayoh had said, "Get off me." I then had to take the position with the family after hearing from the PERC and from the Lord Advocate's office to tell them to step away and to back off. At the time, I told the family, "Don't worry. The PERC will carry out an investigation. They will revisit the investigation. They will go door to door," of course. Many years later, we found out they never bothered. So there was a belief that they would get around to doing that. We were unaware until years later when we got disclosure from Carrie that they never bothered with visiting civilian witnesses again. So as far as I was concerned, Addie Johnson wasn't making it up, because how could he know? He couldn't predict that in 4 years' time, George Floyd would die and say, "I can't breathe." He said the words, "Get off me, I can't breathe." That's what he said was that. And I took that as what he had heard from the witness. And of course, the witness came in. Now, witnesses, all of us as lawyers are experienced to know that witnesses will remember some things many years later and other things they won't remember. But it wasn't controversial. And that's the gist of this. The injuries on Sheku, what happened to him, the petechial hemorrhages in his eyes, the restraint that was used on him, the force that was used on him, the overwhelming force was of him, the screams that were heard, "Get off me." If he said the words, "I can't breathe," what else would you expect him to say? Nothing controversial.
Sorry. So Addie had spoken with a lady and she'd provided this information. So just to be clear, this isn't noted in a statement anywhere. This was a record of a conversation that Addie had had with the lady.
As I said in my opening statement, Addie has been through a great deal over the years. Addie took a statement. He's not a precognition officer. He's not a lawyer. He's a member of the public who was fighting for justice for his dead brother-in-law who he treated as a brother. He went to that door. And I watched Addie suffer a great deal, and I asked him, and the family moved, of course. As I said from Kirkcaldy, they put stuff into, and they tried to find material that stuff was written down, but I said, not to worry. The PERC's carrying out investigation. They'll go to the doors. They'll get this information. Of course, they didn't. As far as I'm concerned, the statements that were taken by the PERC of civilian witnesses were amateur. Amateur. this was not investigation into death of custody. It was totally amateur hour from the PERC, and they failed to get the correct information from witnesses.
So I understand that there wasn't a statement from this witness for whatever reason, and that what we're going on here is information provided verbally to Addy. It might be suggested that Addy believes the lady may have heard Sheku Bayoh saying, "Get off me, I can't breathe," is perhaps different from Sheku Bayoh said, "I can't breathe," which is what was recorded in your tweet. And I wonder if I could invite your comment on that difference.
Well, Twitter has only a certain amount of characters. Anybody who uses Twitter would know that. So you have a certain amount of characters before Elon Musk took over, and you could extend the number of characters. So that's the first thing. In Twitter, you can put down a few lines and you take the crux of it. The words were, "I can't breathe." I didn't, of course, I didn't have enough space in Twitter to say that she heard screams that sent chills through her body. He was screaming like an animal. And he said, "Get off me, I can't breathe." So the words were, "I can't breathe."
Am I right to understand that the tweet was later taken down or deleted?
I don't know. I don't remember. I think I've heard that, but
You can't assist us with?
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know? All right. Okay.
But what I can say to you is this, is that was yet again another example of trying to say that I was a liar and that I was making things up. And Lindsay Miller got the VRR, and she didn't even notice that on the 1st of February 2019 she was provided those words. I didn't just make it up on the hoof in July 2020. It was said there. And the fact that they chose not to take notes at so many meetings that we had wasn't my fault, wasn't the family's fault, and they seemed to forget. I was working pro bono. I had no resources to sit there with an army of lawyers noting down every single word, typing it down or anything. It was me going into meetings with them, with the family.
Now, notwithstanding the word limitation on Twitter, certainly at that time, I wonder whether, with the benefit of hindsight, you might like to reflect on whether there was a sound basis for attributing the words, "I can't breathe," to Sheku Bayoh, given that what we see here in the VRR is that Addy believes that a lady may have heard Sheku Bayoh saying, "Get off me, I can't breathe." The tone is somewhat less certain in what's recorded in the VRR than the tone of what is said in the tweet.
No, I think it's worse, because Addy says she said, "Get off me, I can't breathe," and screams that sent chills through my body. So I think actually if I'd had more words, could have added to the fact that this is what Sheku faced. The words "I can't breathe" were pretty simple in comparison to what Sheku Bayoh endured that day.
Let's return to your statement, please. And I wonder if we can look at paragraph 196. I'm interested in the bottom part of the paragraph, but let's look at it very quickly just to have some context. That's the issue here for the family, that they use the CS spray, they use the Pava spray, they use the batons, and all I can see the actions of a young black man as he's walking open palm towards them, and he keeps walking. He doesn't do anything, and it's on the 4th or 5th occasion that he lashes out, but even then he's down on the ground. Remove yourself from his body. He's struggling, he's crying out, he's making a noise that sends chills through one of the witnesses. Never heard a scream like that. Once the police have got him handcuffed, get off him. Why do they persist? Are they not trained? Do they not know about positional asphyxiation? The whole focus has been on drugs and cardiac arrest. That was the be-all and end-all for them. We pushed and pushed on positional asphyxiation. We pushed and pushed with the PERC on the basis of that. The biomechanics, the whole way his chest being pushed into a hard ground. We could see it, Nat Carey could see it, Professor Crane could see it. There's no need to lie on top of him. There's no need to teach the boy a lesson. That was the insulting term they referred to him as, because that's what this all is. He went after one of us, a white female officer. obviously, we had to teach, he went after one of us, a white female officer. We had to teach him a lesson. I'll stop there because that's the bit that I'm interested in. It's the part in quotation marks there. He went after one of us, a white female officer. We had to teach him a lesson. And there's also a reference to teaching the boy a lesson. And both of these phrases are in quotation marks. I wondered where these quotations had come from.
The boy comes from the reference to Sheku Bayoh disparagingly in many of the police witnesses' statements. I don't remember which police officers were, but they referred to him as a boy. And the first thing was, I spoke to my team because I said, use of a boy for a black man, for anyone who is black, they would know that in the United States, it's regularly used in a demeaning and racist manner. You could be 60 years old, you could be 70 years old, you could be a professor of law, you could be a surgeon, and a police officer will call you boy. And the same thing is translated in this country. And I thought, he wasn't a boy. Some of the police officers may refer to him were actually younger than Sheku Bayoh. So that was the word, the boy, which the family found insulting. And he went after one of us, but he went after us. We had to teach him a lesson. I'm not sure where that comes from. It's not somebody who said that. That's not somebody who said that. I'm saying this is what it felt like for the family. He went after one of us, a white female officer. We had to teach him a lesson. It was the petite female officer that was attacked. Of course, when Mr. Watson refers to the petite female officer that would have been murdered had it not been for the interventions of other officers, fails to mention she is a police officer, a trained police officer with batons and weapons, and there is full backup on the way, and batons and CS spray and pepper spray, of course, have been used. She's still a police officer.
So he went after one of us, a white female officer. We had to teach him a lesson. Just to be clear, you're not attributing that as a quotation to
No.
any of the officers who attended Hayfield Road or indeed anyone else. You're saying that was the family's take
No, I mean,
on events.
I haven't typed the statement up, so I'm not attributing that to any police officer. That's what the family felt this was about.
I'd like to move on to another subject. Can we look at paragraph 141 of your statement, please? I have been asked about my knowledge of the creating and viewing of intelligence logs held by Police Scotland under my name with the subject term refract, used for submission of counter-terrorism intelligence, and when I became aware of this. I was unaware of any details being held. I had always suspected that I had been placed on numerous occasions through my life because of the cases I was involved in that meant conflict with the police. The first time I became aware was when the inquiry last year told me that they had discovered this material in disclosure. Following that, I met with ACC Alan Spears and was shown minimal paperwork at the police HQ. They tried to explain it off by saying they were not allowed to show me the information, but some of it related to death threats to me. This was not satisfactory, but I also was unwilling for the police to be sidetracked into me rather than Sheku's death. I thought when the time arises, then I would deal with it. And if we carry on, please, on to 142. I have been asked whether I was aware that COPFS had referred this matter to the Information Commissioner's Office. I was not aware that the matter was referred by COPFS to the ICO. After all, I was led to believe there was no information stored on me or the family. And you go on to say in paragraph 143 that had there not been a public inquiry, you wouldn't have known anything about it. And I wanted to ask you if you could describe the impact on you of learning that the police held intelligence logs in which the term refract, which the inquiry has heard as a term associated with counter-terrorism intelligence, was associated with your name.
I was shocked, I was angry, and I felt vulnerable. It was Imran Khan, the lawyer for Doreen Lawrence, Imran Khan, King's Counsel, who said to me at the start in May, he said, put in a letter to the Crown Office and ask him to see that there has not been any checks or information gathered on the family. And then Imran said to me at the end, he says, don't forget to add your name. I said, why my name? It's the family that I'm interested in. And Imran said, because that's what they did to him. And says, you need to check. So of course, when that was put in, it came back saying there's nothing found, nothing at all, which wasn't true, because of course, there was a file kept on me. And from that, I can only gather from what I have seen, some information that I'm not allowed to refer to, that I was a subject of targeted surveillance. I was subjected to files kept on me and information that should not have been kept on me. And that begs the question, and I've said it before, if this was a white lawyer doing the job that I was doing, would that be acceptable, or would there be a massive uproar and outrage in this country from lawyers, from the legal establishment, from the law society, from the faculty of advocates, from the government? I believe there would be. But for some reason, because it's Aamer Anwar involved in the death of a black man, there wasn't really any outrage. It didn't really matter. And of course, around about that time, Police Scotland were also found to have engaged unlawful activity in relation to the case of Emma Caldwell, of course, who I act for, the family of Emma Caldwell. So all these years later, I find this all out. Same names popping up, same individuals. I knew DCC Rory Nicholson for a number of years because, of course, Rory, who I know as Rory, had been the one who had provided me support and officers when my life was under threat. But I was never once told this was going on behind the scenes. So I saw myself as a target of surveillance and the target of unlawful activity by the police. But when I was approached by the inquiry, I had to make a decision, and I remember speaking to the rest of my legal team. I said, I cannot become the focus of this inquiry. I cannot be sidetracked. I cannot decide to take legal action because it's a diversion. The focus must remain Sheku Bayoh. But now, here and now, I am angry, I'm upset that why I should be placed in that position, that sort of whispering campaign, lawful activity, police officers up and down this country. How many of them have viewed those logs? What is it they are looking for? What have I done wrong? Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Did you make a complaint?
Did I make a complaint? No, because as I said, I am used to over 25 years, I've said I have never once publicly complained to anyone about my treatment that I have suffered at the hands of Crown Office, at the hands of the police, at the hands of the Scottish Police Federation. I may well have taken advice from people, but I've chosen not to complain because I did not want to be sidetracked into complaining about myself. Because it has to be, as Imran and Michael Mansfield said, keep your eyes on the prize, keep your eyes on the family, keep your eyes on the victim, and do not be baited by them.
I'd like to move on to something else now, Mr. Anwar. And I'd like us to discuss the evidence given by Alistair Lewis, who was the family liaison officer for the PERC. He gave evidence on the 8th of February of this year, and he completed his evidence on the 1st of March of this year. That was days 78 and 87. And you may recall on day 78, he was taken to the flow log, in which there is a record made by him of a telephone call with you, time-stamped 17:48 hours on the 4th of May 2015, written up at 16:45 hours on the 5th of May. So what I'd like to do is begin by bringing that logbook up on the screen. It's PERC 04150. So that we can remind ourselves the content of that entry, and then I will remind you of what Mr. Lewis had to say about this entry before I turn to ask you some questions. So I think we'll find this on page 18 of the flow log. Here we are. So if we stop there, thank you, we see the timestamp, 17:48 hours on the 4th of the 5th, 15. And if we look at the entry itself, advised Aamer Anwar of result of PM, unascertained death, subject to toxicology and brain tissue exam, asked who the pathologist had been, unaware at that time. At the time of the call, Aamer had his children with him, also asked if he could obtain GP details for the PERC to obtain medical records of Sheku for a pathologist. And if we scroll down just a little bit, please, to see the date and time of the write-up. written up at 16:45 hours on the 5th of May 2015. If we could put the content of that entry on the screen again, please, and we'll leave that there. And what I'll do, Mr. Anwar, is read out the evidence that Mr. Lewis gave in connection with this entry.
Okay.
Please bear with me, it's a reasonably lengthy passage, but you'll be aware when it comes to the evidence, I can't bring that up on the screen. I'll simply read it out to you. He was asked, "Where were you when you made this call?" To Mr. Anwar, Kirkcaldy Police Office, out in the backyard away from privacy. The entry says, advised result of PM unascertained subject to toxicology and brain tissue exam. How did Mr. Anwar react to that information? As it says there, he asked who the pathologist had been, and I told him I was unaware at the time. And beyond asking about the pathologist, did he have any reaction to you sharing with him the result of the autopsy? No. You said in your second inquiry statement, paragraph 75, Aamer certainly didn't express any surprise when I told him the PM had been completed. There was no surprise. That is correct. You have recorded in the entry that at the time of the call he had his children with him. How did you know that? I could hear in the background, and we had a bit of conversation about children and looking after them, etc. That was just a bit of professional courtesy between both of us. You say children rather than child. Were you able to tell how many children were with him? I could hear the children in the background, and I probably would have said to him, is it a good time to speak to him? And he told me he was out with his children at the time, and was it okay to continue with the conversation? Did he say where he was? No, I don't think so. Did you have an impression as to what he was doing with the children? Me, other than a father spending time with children? No. Why did you record in the flow log that he had his children with him? Did you think that was a relevant detail that was worth noting down? I could hear in the background that the children were there, so I was just making sure it was a safe environment to talk to him about these circumstances, that's all. It was 17:48, which is after the end of the typical working day, yes. Given that he had his children with him, and you said he was out somewhere with them, did you form any impression as to whether he was able to give you and the call his full attention at that time? He said he could, so I wouldn't have continued the conversation. If he had said phone me back, I would have done that, or he could have phoned me back. You've recorded that he asked you to obtain the details of Mr. Bayoh's GP. Yes, to obtain the medical records. And how did he respond to that request? I can't remember. I think he said he would go back to the family. To be 100% certain, I couldn't be specific about the response. So that was Mr. Lewis's evidence about that particular entry. And I know that was quite a lot of information to give you. It's with a view to refreshing your memory both of the entry and of the evidence that he gave. Now, you were, of course, sent a Rule 8 request in which you were invited to comment on the entry in the logbook. And we had that to hand, or we received your response before Mr. Lewis gave his evidence. And I think it might be helpful at this juncture to bring up on the screen your response to that Rule 8 request. It's SVPI 00453. So we see this is on your headed notepaper, and it's a response to the Rule 8, and you have helpfully copied over each of the questions before then providing your response. So we've refreshed our memory of the entry in the logbook and what Mr. Lewis had to say about that entry in his oral evidence. What I'd like to do now is take you through each of the questions and answers and then ask you some more questions. So the first question reads, Alistair Lewis, Perk Flow, recorded in the flow log that he had a telephone call with you at 17:48 on 4th of May 2015. Now, at this moment, can I just pause and say there's a reference here to the 4th of May. I think that should actually be the 3rd rather than the 4th. I think that's just been a typo. But may I take it that from the context you were clear what you were being asked about when you...
Sorry, so... Okay, 3rd of May. Is it 4th of May I received the call?
Sorry, I beg your pardon, that's my error. I beg your pardon. I think in actual fact, when I went back and looked at the Rule 8 request, there was a reference to the 3rd of May, and
Yes.
you've corrected that.
Yes.
Is that right? Do you
That's
have the
correct.
Do you have the Rule 8 request
I have
there?
the Rule 8 here, and I correct because it said I received a call on 1748 on the 3rd of May, and I said no, it would have been the 4th of May.
Thank you. I'm getting myself in a muddle. So there had been an inadvertent typo in the Rule 8 request that was sent to you, and albeit you copied over the question into your response, you corrected the error, and you amended it from the 3rd to the 4th. But just for the avoidance of doubt, were you clear from the question, even though the date was wrong,
Yes.
what it was you were being asked about?
Yes.
There then follows the text of the log. We've read that out already, so we can skip over that. And if we could scroll down, please. Here is the first question that you were asked. Did you receive a call from Mr. Lewis at 1748 on the 3rd of May? There we are. That's the error there. I knew it was there somewhere. It should have been the 4th. And your reply was, I had already been told on the 4th of May by the family that they wished the post-mortem to be put on hold, and Addy had told the Perk that they wished it delayed until Mrs. Bayoh had arrived and she had seen Sheku. In conversation with Alistair Lewis, this was reiterated by myself on the 4th of May that the PM would be on hold. For him to claim that he told me the post-mortem had gone ahead makes no sense. So can I begin just by being absolutely clear whether you did in fact receive a call from Mr. Lewis at 1748 on the 4th of May?
I don't remember if I received a call at exactly 1748 on the 4th of May. It's a long time ago. I remember I received a call from Mr. Lewis, and he was told in no uncertain terms, pulled the post-mortem on hold because Aamer Anwar, Sheku's mother, was travelling up, and the family wanted the post-mortem, and it wasn't controversial. It was like, that's fine. And also, I think in that conversation I said I was be speaking with the Lord Advocate, Frank Mulholland, now Lord Mulholland. So that's 100% my recollection. So it's just simply not true, and it makes no sense. And of course, his notes were written up, as you said, I think on 1645 on the 5th of May. They weren't written up at the time. They were written the day after, when all hell lets loose, after I've spoken to the Lord Advocate, who then has to call me back and apologise and say he didn't know.
As I said a moment ago, we received your response to the Rule 8 before Mr. Lewis gave his evidence, and so we had the opportunity to put your responses to him and seek his comment. So on day 78, he was given the opportunity to read over this first question and answer, and he was invited to comment. And he said, in conversation with myself, he didn't reiterate to me that the PM would be put on hold. It was later that day, or later, it might have been the following day or a couple of days later, that he told me the Lord Advocate had indicated that the post-mortem would be delayed, and I went back, in that conversation I went back to this phone call there, explaining the post-mortem and what I told him that day. So that's his comment on your response, and this is your opportunity to comment on that.
But that makes absolute no sense for Mr. Lewis, because he knows fine well that on the 5th of May, the family attend my office. I've not looked at the rest of the Rule 8, but on the 5th of May, in the morning, I contact Frank as I knew him, at the time now Lord Mulholland, so no disrespect intended, but Frank saying, can you contact me? This case has happened. I need to speak to you. Post-mortem to be kept on hold. Frank phones me back. Post-mortem will be kept on hold. We say we're going to instruct Professor Basuto. And of course, then later on, I think that morning when the family are there, we get the phone call from the Perk saying, by the way, the post-mortem's taken place, and there's uproar in my office, the room. The family have, I think, about at least 10 members of the family there, and they're crying and they're upset and screaming, what do you mean the post-mortem's taken place? So it wouldn't make sense, because Alistair Lewis, whoever it was that phoned me at the time, why didn't they say, but we told you, Mr. Anwar, the day before? And why is he saying at least a day or a couple of days later? Because he knows fine well the Lord Advocate has gone back to say about the post-mortem, and then he's subsequently told, actually, the post-mortem's already taken place. And then there's a rush to go, Aamer's children must have somehow interfered with this, or, you know, I'll write up my notes at 1645 on the 5th of May, because someone sometime is going to ask the question, why did you allow the post-mortem to go ahead and not tell the family? Because, of course, Mr. Lewis could have told the family directly. I hadn't met with the family. the family liaison officers were, of course, communicating with the Sheku Bayoh family. That relationship hadn't broken down. So why would they not have told the family, by the way, post-mortem's taking place? After all, they were speaking to the family. Why are they saying that later in the evening that they speak to me? Doesn't make sense, and the reason it doesn't make sense is because it's not the truth.
Let's look at the second question that you were asked. What I would like to do is go through each of the questions and your responses to the questions, and then ask you some follow-up questions. So let's move on to number 2. If yes, and this was in relation to whether you'd received a call from him on the evening of the 4th, where were you at the time you received the call? What were you doing at the time you received the call? What was discussed during the call? And you say, as above, but it would have been normal for me to request the name of any pathologist so I could advise our pathologist in order that he could make arrangements to attend the PM. So I want to just go back to the question really and ask you whether you recall where you were when you took the call.
No, I don't, because of course we never saw any of this until, 8-9 years later after Sheku's death. These notes were apparently written at the time. They weren't, of course, written at the time. They were written 2 days later. So I don't recall, unlike Mr. Lewis, exactly where he was at the time. I don't recall where I was, but I do know that if I was receiving a call over Sheku Bayoh in the heat of that moment, then that was my priority, because everything was dropped at the time. In terms of that is the case. From that moment on, I remember the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, right up to the 14th of May, the first press conference. I was at this case non-stop from morning to night, gathering information, speaking to colleagues, trying to get help. What do we do? Speaking to the Lord Advocate, speaking to other individuals. So where I was at the time, I don't know, and it really doesn't matter is the way I would view it, because the point is, he did not tell me the post-mortem had taken place. He did not tell the family the post-mortem would take place. And I asked the Lord Advocate the next morning to put the post-mortem on hold, and the Lord Advocate said it would do. Why would I ask the Lord Advocate, Alistair Lewis? I mean, in a conversation that he's talked to me, would I just forget conveniently when I'm saying, I've been told by the family in the phone call, could you get the post-mortem put on hold? In that same conversation, I would phone back to the family and say, listen, the post-mortem's taking place. I mean, at that time, I would have said, well, I'm sorry, the post-mortem's taking place. That would have been it. But the fact that this has been construed as the truth is just simply not truthful.
Do you recall whether you had your children with you when you took the call?
I don't recall. If I had my children with me, what day of the week would that be? I think it was, so the 4th of May would have been a bank holiday, I think.
Bank holiday Monday, I think.
Bank holiday Monday. But I don't recall if I had my children with me. But in all honesty, it would have not made any difference at all. My children are used to the fact of that I receive phone calls from morning to night. They complain often to me about it, but they're used to the fact that when the phone call comes in, it's like, and even at that time they were younger, so they would listen to me. I'll be like, shut up, be quiet, and they would be quiet. They're not quiet now, but they were quiet at the time.
All right, let's return to Eurolate. Question 3, were you asked to obtain Sheku's GP details from the family so PERT could obtain the medical record for the pathologist? Given your experience as a criminal solicitor, did this request give any indication to you about the timing of the post-mortem? And you say, from recollection, we would have wanted the GP's details, but that would not ever give me an indication of the time, especially as we were trying to arrange a time the following day, so the family could attend first, and of course Monday the 4th was a bank holiday. In my experience, it's not necessarily the case that PM will always take place within the first 24 hours. There's nothing further I want to ask you in relation to that statement. Let's move on to question 4. Do you accept any part of the flow entry as accurate? And you confirm, asked if you could obtain details, GP details for the PERC. You would agree with that. And at question 5, you say that you dispute the remainder, and you're unsure if the matter with regard to your children is true or relevant, and you've covered that already. So let's move on then to question 6. If your position is that you did not receive a call from Mr. Lewis as recorded in the flow log, can you explain his contemporaneous record of that conversation? And I should pause here to note that in the question it's referred to as a contemporaneous record, That may not be correct. Mr. Lewis's evidence is that the entry was written up at 16:45 on the 5th, so nearly 24 hours later. But leaving that to one side, in your response you say it is either false or it is the following day when he calls and the family then have to be told the PM has gone ahead. What do you mean by or the following day? What are you alluding to when you say he calls the following day?
On the 5th of May is when I contact Frank Mulholland. 5th of May, in that morning, before the family arrive, I have the conversation with Frank, Lord Mulholland. And then I meet with the family. And then when I'm in my office at Carlton Place with the family, I receive a phone call from the PERC. At that point, when I'm saying about, I've had a conversation with the Lord Advocate, post-mortem's obviously being kept on hold, we're going to get a pathologist instructed. That's the point I would say, the post-mortem's already took place yesterday. And I say to the family, post-mortem's taking place, and I remember the screams in my room, the upset, the tears, as in how could this be possible? Sheku's mother wanted to see her son before a post-mortem took place. His sisters wanted to see their son. Adi wanted to see his brother-in-law. And they were like, but why? Because they were told, they had said to the PERC, hold it, wait for his mother to arrive. And they couldn't even give that family the courtesy of holding back a post-mortem. I have seen in my time as a criminal defence lawyer the number of times that post-mortems haven't taken place immediately. And of course, it's a bank holiday weekend. They'd held it back to the 5th. What difference would it have made to the PERC? None at all. But of course, at the post-mortem, we now know police officers were present that shouldn't have been present, but the family weren't entitled to be present.
Let's look at question 7. If you accept that a conversation took place on the 4th of May at 1748 in which there was a discussion about the post-mortem, please also comment on the following extract from Mr. Lewis's inquiry statement. Aamer certainly did not express any surprise when I told him the post-mortem had been completed and subject to toxicology and a brain tissue exam. He asked who was the pathologist. There was no surprise. I assumed that he was aware of that. There was certainly nothing to say that he was unaware of the post-mortem going on. Now, your response to that is not true. And if we scroll down, we'll see that you, in support of your position that this is not true, you advance a number of paragraphs, I think 10 in total. If we could very quickly scroll through those, just to be sure. 10 paragraphs in total, or 10 points that you make in support of your statement that this is just not true. What I would like to do is go through these points with you in turn and ask some questions. However, I'm mindful that it's a couple of minutes until 1 o'clock, sir.
Yes, I think we'll stop for lunch and we'll do that after lunch at 2 o'clock.